I try to laugh it off. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you get any sleep?" "Shut up. Just shut up." He hurls his phone against the wall, barely missing me. My body freezes, every muscle tense. "You do not even sound like her. You do not even move like her." I know damn well what a demon looks like. When David first decided to go back to seminary school, I was all for it. Religion had never been his thing, but after he finally gave up drinking, I was just grateful to see him sober. So if studying the Bible helped him stay away from the bottle, then I could support it. But his preaching started to push us apart from our friends and family. It felt like he was always pointing out how I was failing, how I was not living up to the wife I was supposed to be according to God's will. We had not had kids together, and I had family just a few hours away I could stay with. It felt like leaving was the right decision. So about 2 years into his evangelical theology studies, I told him I wanted out. To my surprise, he took it calmly. I thought maybe it would be an easy, clean split. That is when the seizures started. I had dealt with them on and off since the early days of our marriage. The doctors could not figure out why. My regular physician, a few nurses, and even a neurologist were stumped. Eventually, they just put it down to probably stress and wrote me prescriptions for anticonvulsants and sedatives. But David refused to let me leave the house to pick up the medication. He had given up his own prescriptions long ago. Jesus heals all sickness, and putting faith in human medicine over the Lord's power is a sin. In fact, David had not let me leave the house at all for weeks. He left one day saying he would find a doctor to come to the house, but he returned with an exorcist. For 6 days, I was tied down to the bed, starved to drive the demon out. He held a hot piece of firewood close to my face, trying to scare it out of me. I was helpless as they forced foul, burning liquids down my throat. My mouth pried open while they poured mixtures of holy water and strange herbs, all aimed to cast out whatever evil spirit they believed I had. After those 6 horrible days, the exorcist finally left. I looked at him with pleading eyes, silently begging him to call the police. But after a few quiet words with David, the man left, and I was left alone again, totally at his mercy. Now he was looking at me with wild eyes, filled with a ferocity that I had only read about, like he truly believed he was staring down Satan himself. "David, please," I plead, reaching for him in desperation. I am too hopeless to think about how many times I have begged him this way before. Too hopeless to remember that it only makes him angrier. "David, I am your wife. I am Caroline. We got married in my dad's backyard on April 14th, 1998. I am a designer. I love you, David, I do. I am Caroline, your wife. Please, just let me go," I choke out, barely realizing that tears are spilling down my cheeks. He pulls out a big glass bottle and steps closer. I brace myself, assuming it will be another vile drink he will force me to swallow. But instead, he opens it and pours the liquid all over me. The sharp smell fills my nose. It is alcohol. "It is by the power of the Holy Spirit that I cast out these demons," he says in a deep, cold voice as he pulls a matchbook from his pocket. My mouth opens in horror, but he jams a rag into my mouth, cutting off my scream. "And so the kingdom of God shall come upon you." He lights a match. Our eyes meet. In that brief moment, I understand everything. No one will believe it, and I would not have had anyone to tell. Everyone will say he was just a madman who killed his wife, mistaking her for some evil spirit. But in that final look, my gaze locks onto his, searching for answers. In that last second, I see the truth in his crazed, furious eyes, and I silently ask him, "This was all you, right? These fits? This demon? Just because I wanted to leave?" With a barely there nod, he drops the match. The flames lick up around me, and I can feel the heat searing into my skin, but I can barely scream. The rag in my mouth stifles the sound, and David stands there watching, his eyes wide and glazed, his mouth muttering verses under his breath, like he is entranced. Each second drags on like an eternity as the fire starts to consume me. But my mind does not want to focus on the pain. My mind is grasping for clarity in those last moments. How did I get here? How did it all go so wrong? It all started so innocently. When I met David, he was charming, a bit reserved, but he had this sweetness, this warmth, especially in those early days. He was a couple of years older than me, and had this way of looking after me, making me feel safe, protected. Back then, he never talked much about God. Not like this. Faith was part of his life, sure, but it was not like he was devoted or anything. Honestly, he only went to church on holidays, and most of the time, he acted like he was just going through the motions. But when he quit drinking, everything changed. The man who once looked after me, who once wrapped his arms around me, now saw the world through a different lens. Suddenly, every little thing was some test, some trial. Anything he thought was wrong was either sinful or the devil himself. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly being told how I needed to live, how I should speak, how I should dress. I remember the first time I mentioned leaving. We were sitting in our little kitchen. I had not even brought it up seriously. I just said I needed some space, that maybe a break would be good for us both. His eyes had gone dark, his jaw set tight, but he forced a smile. "That is not what a good Christian wife does, Caroline," he said. "Our marriage is sacred, and running away from it is abandoning your duty." Duty. That is all I became to him. A duty, a role. And somewhere along the way, my dreams, my wants, all of that was swallowed up by his idea of what our marriage should look like, by what he thought God wanted. I never thought it would come to this, though. I never thought the man who once held me close would end up trying to burn me alive. As the fire blazes higher, I thrash against the binds, desperate to free myself. The flames are climbing faster, licking up my arms, my legs. My skin is blistering, and the smell of burning fills the room. Through the haze of agony, my eyes flick to David. He just stands there, watching with this terrifying calm, murmuring scripture as if he is praying. I think about my family. My mother's face flashes before me, her eyes, her smile, the way she used to stroke my hair when I was a kid, brushing it out of my face. I think about the life I could have had if I had just left sooner, before it got this far. Then suddenly something shifts inside me. A deep, primal rage bubbles up, stronger than the pain. If I am going to die, then I'm going to do it fighting. I twist my wrists, struggling against the ropes that are beginning to weaken from the flames. Bit by bit, I manage to loosen my arm, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through me. And then somehow I pull one arm free. I swipe at the rag in my mouth, managing to yank it out. A ragged scream bursts from my throat, raw and filled with every ounce of terror, fury, and despair left in me. David's eyes snap to me, his face flickering between shock and something like fear. "David!" I scream, my voice a rasping croak. You are the monster! You are the demon!" For a moment he looks shaken. I see it, the slightest glimmer of doubt, like maybe, just maybe, he is finally realizing what he is doing. But just as quickly, that glimmer fades and his face hardens again. "Be silent, demon," he mutters, and his hands tighten around the matchbook, as if readying for something more. But I am not going down without a fight. I manage to free my other arm and, ignoring the searing pain, I hurl myself forward. My body slams into him, knocking him off balance, and for a second, he stumbles. I claw at his face, my fingers digging in, fueled by a strength I did not know I had. He shouts, recoiling, and I seize the moment, scrambling toward the door. I am almost there, almost free. I can feel the cool air rushing in, cutting through the heat and smoke as I reach for the handle. But before I can open it, I feel his hand wrap around my ankle, yanking me back. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. He is on top of me now, his face twisted in rage, and I know that he has lost whatever shred of humanity he once had. As he looms over me, I feel a strange calm settle in. This is how it ends. There is no getting out. But if this is my final moment, then I am not going to give him the satisfaction of thinking he has won. I meet his gaze, steady and unflinching, and in a voice as strong as I can muster, I whisper, "You will never break me, David. You will never take my soul." For the briefest instant, he hesitates, and in that flicker of uncertainty, I find my strength. With one final, desperate scream, I surge forward, my hand clawing at his face, and he jerks back, momentarily blinded. I scramble away, But as I make it to the threshold, I feel my vision fading. The smoke, the pain, the exhaustion, everything is pulling me under. My body collapses, my last breath escaping as I feel the world go dark. When I come to, I'm lying in a hospital bed. My whole body feels like it's been torn apart and stitched back together, each breath sending waves of pain through my chest. The sterile smell of antiseptics fills my nose, and bright lights stab at my eyes. For a second, I think maybe I'm dead, that I didn't make it out. But slowly I start to recognize the beeping of a heart monitor, the faint hum of hospital machinery, and the whisper of voices nearby. I try to speak, but my throat feels raw and torn, like I've swallowed fire. A nurse glances over, and her eyes widen when she sees I'm awake. She rushes to my side, her voice gentle but urgent. "You're safe," she says, brushing a cool hand over my forehead. "You're in the hospital, just rest." Safe. The word echoes in my mind like it's some foreign concept. How could I possibly feel safe after everything that's happened? David. The memory of his face, twisted with rage and zealotry, flashes through my mind, and my whole body tenses. I feel the phantom heat of the flames, the tight grip of his hand around my ankle, pulling me back from the door. A shudder rips through me, and the nurse gently squeezes my hand. "It's okay," she murmurs. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." I want to believe her, but the fear is too deeply rooted. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I hear his voice, muttering verses as he stares down at me like I'm some vile creature to be purged. I wonder if this is how it feels to be haunted. Days pass in a blur of nurses, doctors, and whispered conversations that stop whenever I'm awake. They ask me questions, but I'm too drained, too shattered to give them much. It's like I'm floating outside myself, watching as the pieces of my life fall apart around me. But one question keeps gnawing at me, echoing through my mind every time the room is quiet. How did I survive? My body is battered, my skin scarred from the burns. But somehow, I'm alive. It feels like some kind of cruel joke. Every time I touch the raw, blistered skin on my arms, I think of David, his hand reaching for the match. I hear his voice, cold and certain, calling me a demon, and I wonder if he truly believed it, or if he just wanted an excuse to get rid of me. One afternoon, as I lie staring at the ceiling, a police officer comes into my room. He's young, probably just a few years older than I am, with a kind face that seems out of place in this grim setting. "Caroline, right?" he asks, his voice soft. "I'm Officer Reynolds. I just have a few questions if you're up for it." I nod, my throat tight. I can barely get the words out, but I know I need to tell someone. I need them to understand what happened, even if it sounds insane. He sits beside me, his notepad in hand, and gently starts to ask about David. Every word feels like tearing open an old wound, but I force myself to answer. I tell him about the exorcism, about the 6 days I spent tied to that bed, starving and helpless. I tell him about the tinctures, the holy water, the fire held so close I could feel the skin on my face blistering. And I tell him about that last night when he poured alcohol over me and dropped the match. Officer Reynolds listens in silence, his face growing graver with each word. When I finish, he lets out a slow breath, looking at me with an expression I can't quite read. "Caroline," he says quietly, "we found him. Your husband. He was in the house when the fire department arrived. They managed to get him out, but he didn't make it." I stare at him, my mind struggling to process the words. David is dead. Gone. The realization hits me like a punch to the gut, filling me with a strange mix of relief and guilt. I should feel free, I should feel safe, but all I feel is emptiness. Officer Reynolds shifts in his seat, glancing down at his notepad before meeting my gaze again. "The firemen found something unusual in the house," he says, his voice careful. "In the room where they found you, there were symbols, strange markings painted all over the walls. They were dark, disturbing. Do you know anything about them?" I shake my head, my mind spinning. Symbols? Markings? I try to think back, but all I remember is the pain, the flames, and David's face looming over me. I don't remember any symbols, but the thought of them, of David painting something twisted on the walls sends a chill through me. He wasn't himself, I whisper, my voice trembling. After he quit drinking, he changed. He became obsessed, started seeing evil everywhere, like he was constantly at war with something. I thought it was just the stress, maybe the pressure from school, but those symbols, I don't know, maybe he was really losing his mind. Officer Reynolds nods, scribbling something in his notebook. Thank you, Caroline, he says softly, standing up. If you remember anything else, let us know. We're just trying to make sense of all this. As he leaves, I close my eyes, trying to piece together the fragments of memory, to make sense of something that feels too dark and twisted to be real. Part of me wonders if David really was seeing things, if maybe he had been wrestling with something evil all along. But then I remember his final nod, that cold confirmation when I asked if it was all him, if this nightmare had started because he could not stand the thought of me leaving. I don't know how long I sit there, replaying that last look, but eventually exhaustion pulls me under again. And in the dark, the memories come flooding back. I see the fire, feel the heat, and hear David's voice, calling me a demon, damning me to burn. The days slip by in a fog of pain and nightmares. Each time I drift off, I find myself back in that room, strapped to the bed, David's twisted face hovering over me. I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the echoes of his voice still ringing in my ears. The nurses try to comfort me, but it's like they're speaking through a wall of thick glass. I'm aware of them, but their words barely reach me. Every once in a while, Officer Reynolds stops by. He asks more questions, his tone always calm, but I can tell he's struggling to put together what happened. So am I. The story sounds insane, even to me. I'm sure he's wondering how a man like David, a church-going seminary student with no criminal record, could descend into such violence. I wish I had an answer. Then one morning I receive a visitor I'm not prepared for. My mother. She rushes into the room, her face pale and drawn, and the moment she sees me, she breaks down. She pulls me into a careful hug, her hands shaking as they press against my shoulders. "Oh, honey," she whispers, her voice breaking. I thought I'd lost you." I hug her back, my own tears starting to flow. The truth is, I hadn't really let myself feel it until now. The weight of what happened, the fact that I made it out alive. I cling to my mother, breathing in her familiar scent, and for the first time, I feel a small measure of safety. But it doesn't last long. She pulls back, her face tight with worry as she looks me over. "Caroline," she says gently, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I nod, swallowing hard. Did he ever talk to you about seeing things? Things that weren't there?" Her question catches me off guard. I shake my head slowly, trying to think back. No, not exactly. He would talk about evil, about sin, but I thought that was just his faith. I pause, hesitant. "Why are you asking?" My mother takes a deep breath, glancing toward the door to make sure no one else is listening. "After you were taken to the hospital, the police gave me your things, including your journals. I didn't mean to go through them, but I needed to understand what was happening. Caroline, some of the things you wrote, they're strange, almost like you were seeing things too." The words hit me like a slap. My journals? I barely remember writing in them. It was something I did when I needed to vent, to process my feelings. But the idea that I might have been recording things that sounded like hallucinations fills me with a deep, creeping dread. What did I write?" I ask, my voice barely a whisper. My mother hesitates, her eyes filled with worry. "You wrote about shadows," she says quietly, "about feeling like something was watching you. You mentioned seeing, a figure in your room at night. You wrote that it looked like David but wasn't him, that it moved in strange, unnatural ways. Caroline, are you sure he didn't put these ideas into your head? That he didn't do something to you?" A cold shiver runs down my spine. I don't remember seeing anything like that, but the more I think about it, the more fragments of memory start to come back. There were times when I felt like someone was in the room with me, even when I was alone. Times when I would wake up, my heart racing, certain that I had heard footsteps or seen a shadow moving across the wall. I'd always brushed it off as stress, as my imagination playing tricks on me. But now, I'm not so sure. "Mom," I say, my voice shaking, "I don't remember writing any of that." She reaches out, taking my hand in hers. I think David was trying to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel like you were losing your mind. He was obsessed with the idea of evil, and maybe he wanted you to believe it too. Caroline, he was dangerous. He was sick." I want to believe her, but something doesn't feel right. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this, that David's descent wasn't just the result of some twisted religious zealotry. I remember the symbols Officer Reynolds mentioned, the strange markings on the walls of our bedroom. I hadn't seen them myself, but the thought of David painting something dark and unholy around our bed fills me with a strange, sickening dread. As if sensing my thoughts, my mother squeezes my hand. "You don't have to figure it all out now, honey. Just focus on getting better. You're safe here, and that's all that matters." I nod, trying to let her words comfort me, but the unease lingers. There's something nagging at the edges of my memory, something I can't quite grasp. I close my eyes, trying to push it away, but the images come anyway. Shadows, flickering lights, the feeling of being watched. The hospital keeps me a few more days to monitor my recovery, and during that time, the nightmares only get worse. I keep seeing David's face, twisted with rage, looming over me. Sometimes in the dreams, he's chanting scripture, his voice growing louder and more intense until it becomes a deafening roar. Other times he's silent, his face eerily blank as he watches me struggle against the binds. On the last night, just before I'm set to be discharged, I wake up to find a figure standing in the corner of my hospital room. It's dark, but I can make out the silhouette, a tall, thin man with broad shoulders, his head tilted to one side as if he's studying me. "David?" I whisper, my voice barely audible. The figure doesn't move. It just stands there watching me, and a wave of cold terror washes over me. I want to scream, to call for help, but my body feels frozen, paralyzed by fear. Then slowly, the figure steps forward, and I realize with a sickening jolt that it's not David. The face is wrong, distorted and shadowed, with eyes that gleam in the darkness. The thing, whatever it is, leans down, its face inches from mine, and I feel its breath, hot and foul against my skin. "You thought you escaped," it whispers, its voice a low, guttural hiss. "But I'm still with you, Caroline. I will always be with you." The next thing I know, I'm screaming, thrashing in my bed as nurses rush in, their faces filled with concern. They try to calm me, to assure me it was just a nightmare, but I know what I saw. I know that whatever was standing in my room wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it's not finished with me yet. It has been 2 weeks since my discharge, and life has not returned to anything close to normal. I am staying with my mother, who has been as supportive as possible, but she has noticed how little I sleep and how jumpy I've become. Even in the comfort of her house, I feel watched. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards sends my heart racing. The police have mostly closed David's case. They're convinced it was an unfortunate tragedy, a devout man overtaken by obsession and madness. But I can't shake the feeling that they missed something crucial. I'm haunted by the symbols they found in the house, by the things I supposedly wrote in my journal, by the figure I saw in the hospital. One night, unable to sleep, I dig through my bags until I find my journal, the one the police returned to me. I sit down on the edge of my bed and begin to flip through it, my fingers trembling. The handwriting is mine, but I don't remember writing most of the entries. They're filled with strange phrases, frantic descriptions of shadows and whispers, and drawings of symbols that make my skin crawl just looking at them. As I skim through the pages, a few entries stand out. I feel it watching me again. David says it's just my imagination, but I know it's real. I know he sees it too. Woke up last night to find David standing over me, murmuring something under his breath. His eyes looked different, not his, like something else was looking out of them. I keep seeing shadows even in the light. They move on their own, shifting like they're alive. David says they're a test, that I have to be strong. But I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm losing myself. A cold chill seeps into my bones. These entries were written in the weeks before David's behavior took that final, terrifying turn. He wasn't just imagining evil, he believed he was fighting it. But what if? What if something had truly changed him? As I turn to the last entry, a sentence catches my eye, scribbled in large, uneven letters across the bottom of the page. He said he will come for me when I am alone. My heart pounds in my chest as I stare at the words, trying to comprehend their meaning. It doesn't make sense. David is gone. He cannot come for me. And yet, deep down, I feel a terrible certainty that something remains unfinished. I close the journal, shoving it back into my bag, but the fear lingers. That night, I lie awake, listening to every sound, waiting for something to happen. And in the early hours of the morning, when the house is silent and still, I hear it, the faintest whisper, barely audible, coming from somewhere in my room. Caroline, the voice is low, almost a murmur, but unmistakable. It's David's voice, thick with something dark, something that feels too ancient and too evil to belong to a man. I freeze, my breath catching in my throat as the whisper continues, growing louder and more insistent. Caroline, you cannot escape me. The words fill the room, echoing in my ears until I can't take it anymore. I leap out of bed, fumbling for the light switch, but when I turn it on, the room is empty. I'm alone. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, is stronger than ever. I sink to the floor, clutching my knees to my chest, trembling as I realize that whatever was inside David, whatever drove him to madness, it's not gone. It has found me. In the days that follow, I try to rationalize the voice, the sense of being followed. I tell myself it's just trauma, that it's my mind's way of coping with the horror I went through. But each night, the whispers return, growing louder and more insistent. Shadows dance on the walls, twisting into shapes that make my stomach churn. The air feels thick, oppressive, as though the house itself is holding its breath. One night, in a moment of desperation, I reach out to Officer Reynolds, begging him to come over. I do not know what I expect him to do, but I just need someone to witness what I'm experiencing, to validate that I'm not losing my mind. He hesitates but agrees, sensing the terror in my voice. When he arrives, I tell him everything. The journal, the symbols, the whispers in the night. He listens patiently, his face etched with concern, but I can tell he's struggling to believe me. Carolyn, he says gently, David's gone. You're safe now. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us after something traumatic. It doesn't mean you're crazy, it just means you need time to heal. I want to believe him, but a voice in the back of my mind tells me that he's wrong. Still, he stays with me that night, keeping watch as I try to sleep. I lie there, eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the house, waiting for the whispers to return. But with Officer Reynolds nearby, the night is silent, almost peaceful. In the morning, I feel a flicker of hope. Maybe he's right. Maybe the presence I feel is just a phantom of my own fear. But as he's leaving, Officer Reynolds pauses in the doorway, his face pale. Caroline, he says slowly, glancing back at me. Before I go, I just wanted to ask, did you know about the symbol on the outside of your bedroom door? I feel my blood run cold. What symbol? I whisper, my voice barely audible. He swallows, his eyes dark with worry. There's a symbol scratched into the wood. It looks old, and I think it's the same one we found on the walls of your bedroom. A wave of nausea washes over me as I realize that whatever was inside David, whatever he believed he was fighting, is not confined to that burned house. It has followed me here, marking its presence, making itself known. Officer Reynolds leaves, promising to check back soon, but I know he cannot protect me. No one can. That night, the whispers return, louder and clearer than ever. They fill my mind, drowning out every other thought until I am nothing but fear and dread. And in that final, horrifying moment, I realize the truth. David was right. There was something with him, something he tried to fight, something he tried to keep at bay. But now that he's gone, it has no one left to torment but me. I sit alone in the darkness, waiting for dawn, knowing that this is only the beginning.